Rita, Gabrielle, nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Rita. So I was just about to just introduce Simon. So for those of you that we're really fortunate to have Simon here join us today, and for Simon, for you to know, everyone who has joined today, Rob is joining us for the first time, but pretty much everyone else is part of the book club.
Okay.
So that should just give you an idea for the audience. But again, thank you everyone for joining us. As you know, Simon, he's an international author, and he's the author of the book that we've been reading, Yoga and the Dark Night of the Soul. In addition to being an author, he's a teacher of yoga philosophy, and he specializes very specifically on how we can take the wisdom and apply it to everyday life. As you know, from a very young age, he's been studying sacred yoga texts. And we can see from the book, he spent extensive time living in temples and monasteries in India. And he is also apprenticed with a master, a practitioner in the Bhakti tradition. And he did that for the last 16 years. It's really amazing through the book to be able to see a lot of the stories that have unfolded in his time and his travel. And I always find it very interesting how he shares not only the wisdom that he's gained through his observations and study from the text, but also the wisdom that's been imparted to him from his teachers. As you know, the first book is one of his international bestsellers, the Book of Dharma, Making Enlightened Choices, and that's been published in now 5 languages. This book, specifically the Yoga and the Dark Night of the Soul, it focuses on exploring how crisis and difficulty can form part of the, how can be delivered workshops on this book, really in all different parts of the world. I had the good fortune of being with Simon just last week, and we were just talking about his most recent retreat that he led in Colombia with a group of students. And we were really fortunate. I think most of us have seen the clip that he had from the United Nations back in 2009, where he was very specifically talking about this this model of the Dharma code model as an alternative solution to, I know at that time it was on resolutions, but specifically on climate control. So currently, one of the reasons why we're particularly fortunate to have Simon is that currently he's working on his PhD at Oxford University. And so he's quite busy with that. And this what makes our time with him very special. So, please take the opportunity to welcome Simon. And Simon, before we get started, usually every session, we start the session by giving thanks to our teachers, and we chant specific mantras that allow us to basically allow us to basically maximize our full potential. So I will go ahead and lead us in that, and then we'll hand it over to you.
Ricken, before you start, could I just quickly say that
Please.
I feel incredibly honored to be here with you. And for me, it's a very special opportunity to get to spend some time with you all. Ricken has told me a little bit about the group and about you all, and it's really an honor. So thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you, Simon. So I'll go ahead and just lead us. Om Gyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chaksur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangu Langete Kirim Yat Kripatam Aham Bande Shri Guru Dinataranam Vanchakalpa Turbhyascha Kripa Sunda Evacha Patita Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So in those mantras, as we chant and recite at the beginning of each of our sessions, we're giving thanks to all our teachers that have passed down the wisdom and the knowledge to us. We're asking all of our teachers to make us not only good speakers, but also receivers of this knowledge. And we offer our respects to all those compassionate beings that have gathered here today to what I always say, make the world a better place. So thank you for joining us. And Simon, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rikin. In this particular session, I thought that what we would do is kind of bring it together, the various chapters of Yoga and the Dark Night of the Soul, and at least begin with something of an overview of how it all fits together. The Bhagavad Gita is just an incredible text, but it's also a text that's a little bit difficult to access. And the reason for that is that it's written in what is known as, it's almost in sutra form. Sutra is like a condensed universe of meaning that's expressed in just a few words. So each of the verses of the Gita is very much like that. And it contains a universe of meaning. The other difficulty, of course, is that it's in Sanskrit, and it's codified in Sanskrit, and it's written in a different culture and a different time. So that can make it a little bit challenging and daunting for readers who are trying to access the Gita. But the work is very worth it, because this text contains some of ancient India's most powerful wisdom. And it's a text that is considered a yoga classic. So we generally think of yoga, for those of you here who maybe practice yoga, we generally think of yoga as being physical postures and also to some extent breathing exercises. And that's certainly part of yoga. But yoga is something much broader than that. And it's a way of life, a way of bringing out our full potential in the field of action. And this comes out especially in the Bhagavad Gita. So one thing that's very surprising about the Bhagavad Gita is the setting. So usually a yoga text, if you look at other yoga texts, or you look at the Puranas and other texts of India, it usually happens in the forest. So maybe a beautiful mountain, lake, or along the bank of a river, a very peaceful, tranquil place. But here in the Gita, you have yoga teachings being imparted to a warrior, the warrior Arjuna. And that's happening right in the middle of a battlefield at the onset of war. So you look at that and you wonder what's happening here. And the Bhagavad Gita has different layers of meaning. So there's a literal interpretation, there's a literal understanding or dimension. There is an ethical dimension in the text. There is also a symbolic dimension of the text. And the symbolic dimension is important and interesting because it makes every aspect of that narrative applicable to us in our everyday life. So the battlefield is known as Kurukshetra. Kshetra means field, and Kuru comes from the word Kri, which means to do. So it's the field of doing, the field of action. That field of action is a field that we're all in at all times. It's a field that we cannot escape. So even when we decide not to do anything, I think we've all had this experience. When we decide not to do anything, that can have the greatest impact, for better or for worse. So even that in itself, not doing something, is a form of action. So Krishna, the charioteer of Arjuna, tells him that you cannot escape this field of action. So really, the question becomes, how can we act skillfully in that field? And Krishna says that ability to act with skill on the field of action is known as yoga. Yoga karma sukaushalam. Yoga is skillfulness in our action. So our field of action can be very much like a battlefield sometimes. Unexpected changes in fortunes, frenetic, chaotic. It can resemble a battlefield. And in that chaos and in among the difficulty that we face in everyday life, how do we keep centered? How can we create a sacred space from which to act? That's the question that the Bhagavad Gita explores. And in doing that, Krishna gives 18 different systems of yoga, each one in a particular chapter. So you have 18 chapters, and each one is a different system of yoga. And each one aims to help us live skillfully in the frenetic or confusing or sometimes really quite challenging situations that we face. Find ourselves in relief. So we'll just take a look at a couple of systems of yoga. And Rikin, can you, at what point have you in the reading group, on which chapter are you at the moment?
Yeah, so as I was mentioning to you last week, we pretty much started section 4, and that was where let knowledge be the sword of discernment.
Yeah, be the warrior's sword. Okay.
Warrior sword.
Have you, as a group, have you already gone through any of those chapters, or that's just still coming?
We did the introductory part of that chapter, and then we were gonna get we were basically starting on remembering who we are. Okay,
great. Thank you. That's really exciting. Those are some really, that's a really interesting part of the Bhagavad Gita, and extremely, I've found it in my own life extremely helpful. I do want to say that for me, the opportunity to discuss these topics helps me deepen my own practice. And so in that sense, I see you all as my teachers, and I feel really lucky to be here with you, discussing the teachings of the Gita. So some of the systems of yoga, the very first system of yoga, as you know, is Vishad Yoga, or the yoga of despair, the yoga of crisis. Now that in itself is particularly striking, because generally in the way that yoga has come to the West and been translated in the West for our culture, it has embedded itself, not always, but mostly it has embedded itself in the wellness industry. And generally people think that yoga is about feeling good and feeling happy and tranquil and peaceful. And definitely yoga can help that. But yoga is actually in the tradition of the yoga traditions of India, yoga is intended for navigating difficulty in life. So when everything's going well in our life, it's very easy to be a yogi or a yogini. It's very, very easy to have all of these qualities that are described in the Gita, like patience and fortitude and kindness and non-violence and truth. But it's when there's difficulty in our life that these things are actually tested, and our ability in yoga is also deepened. It's a little bit like a pilot. Pilot flying a plane doesn't deepen her ability when the plane is on autopilot flying through clear sky. It's when there are difficulties and challenges. So an engine breaks down, or the instruments aren't functioning, or you're traveling through a very difficult storm. That's when we test our ability, and that's when we deepen our ability. So in the same way, our wisdom, our skill in navigating life is tested by the challenges that we face. So having said that, I also don't want to, what's the word, romanticize difficulty or the dark night experience. The dark night of the soul is an extremely difficult period of our life. And in the yoga tradition of India, there isn't this kind of idea that we find maybe in the gym, which is no pain, no gain. This idea it doesn't, rather it's the opposite. One definition of yoga is dukkam samyoga viyogam. Yoga is breaking our connection to suffering. So suffering inevitably, pain inevitably comes our way. And we'll look at the difference maybe if we have some time between suffering and pain. But difficulties and challenges and painful experiences inevitably come our way. And the suffering that we experience, not the pain, but the suffering, is something that we largely create in the way that we address a painful situation, in the way that we navigate pain in our life. And hopefully we'll have a chance to look at that in a little more detail. So that connection, like this, that binding connection that we have with suffering in the way that we live out our story in this world, disconnecting that is called yoga. So the very first system of yoga is the yoga of crisis. So this is really important, because if we think that the wisdom of yoga or the teachings of yoga are simply for tranquility and being peaceful and happy, when we encounter a very difficult situation in our life, we may find that we don't have the tools. We may find that we're not able, well, a few things in my experience happen. Sometimes we may think that our own practice has let us down. So we wonder, why is this happening to me? And we may find we don't have the tools to navigate that difficulty. So the yoga of crisis, Vishad Yoga, teaches us that difficulty is an inevitable part of life. And each one of us will go through an existential crisis at some point in our life, perhaps even several times. A dark night of the soul. It's an inevitable part of life, just like winter is an inevitable part of life that accompanies summer or spring. So the question really becomes, how can we navigate difficulty? And that's the first system of yoga. And we'll come back to that in a moment. Then what follows in the Gita are a series of other systems of yoga that are incredibly helpful and powerful. One of them is karma yoga, which as a group you've covered already, which is it's the ability to make our work our practice. So this is really where yoga becomes very interesting, because rather than yoga being something that that's reserved for the yoga mat, our entire life becomes our yoga mat. So everything that we do in everyday life is part of our yoga practice. That's known as continuous practice. And our yoga mat essentially becomes the field of action. So this field of action, or Kurukshetra, on which we are located, it's the field of the present moment, because action cannot happen in any place in this universe except the present moment. Anything that we've done in the past, we did it when it was in the present. Anything we do in the future, we'll only be able to do it in the present. So the present moment is the field of action, and it's the field of change and transformation. So Kurukshetra is the field of now. How to make that field a sacred place. So karma yoga is such an important system of yoga. I have found in traveling around the world and speaking with people from different cultures and societies and countries, that there tends to be, most people tend to really dislike their work. So occasionally you meet someone who is following their calling, and they really they gain energy out of their work, and their work is in a sense their yoga practice. But the majority of us, we seem to hate our work. The worst day, certainly in especially I think maybe in England and Western Europe, worst day of the week is Monday. The best day of the week is Friday. But we actually spend most of our time engaged in some form of work. So I think most people begin their work they begin working in, anywhere from maybe the age of 18 to, if we're continuing our studies, we might in our 20s begin work, and the age of retirement is normally around 65. So really the largest part of our life we're devoting a huge amount of time, perhaps the majority of our waking day, to some form of work. So if we approach that work in a way where it's leading us to feel dissatisfaction and we feel numb inside, we're actually setting ourselves up to be unhappy for the majority of our life. So life is really short. It passes almost, it feels like each year passes like the blink of an eye. And Krishna teaches Arjuna how to make work our yoga practice, how to find deep fulfillment in what we do. So that's karma yoga. Then you have Gyan yoga. So the yoga of knowledge, the yoga of discernment, which Krishna likens to a sword, Jnana Asina, the sword of knowledge. What is that sword cutting? It's cutting away our false perceptions about the world and about ourselves. So I won't say so much about that now, because you're just entering that topic, and that'll be very exciting. One of the teachings in that part is a system of yoga known as the yoga of the wealth of the gods and goddesses. So you'll come to that really quite soon. So in this life, we tend to accumulate. We come into this world, the Gita teaches us, naked, without anything. And we will leave this world naked without anything, meaning there's nothing that we gather in this life that we'll be able to take with us at the end of life. But somehow, between our naked birth and our naked death, we begin to think in terms of I and mine. And we accumulate so many things that become so important, and that we gain our sense of worth and our sense of identity from. So Krishna teaches Arjuna a different type of accumulation. Rather than being so enamored, even obsessed with accumulating material things, which are temporary, Krishna teaches Arjuna to accumulate the wealth of the gods and goddesses. So these are incredible qualities like gratitude, kindness, non-violence, truthfulness, patience, and so on. And in this system of yoga, just like searching for any treasure, the first step becomes understanding where the treasure lies in order to find it. And then how to hold that treasure in one's heart, in one's being, in such a way that it can never be taken from us. It becomes really who we are. Even in the greatest difficulties, our patience, our kindness will not dissipate, but will actually become stronger. So that is known as embodied wisdom. And it's very interesting, this part of the Gita, because Arjuna, he is not short of knowledge. He has had the best teachers in his life. Is his older brother Yudhishthira, who's known as the Dharma king. He's had the teachings of Vyasa, the author of the Mahabharata. He's had as his teachers great rishis or sages. And so he's not short of knowledge. But Arjuna finds that in the dark night of the soul, everything he's learned can no longer help him. He finds himself completely powerless in the crisis that he's facing. So he asks Krishna a very, I think it's a peculiar question. He says, Krishna, tell me, what is knowledge? So we generally think we know what knowledge is. Knowledge is what you learn, and perhaps you memorize it and you know it. So Arjuna's question is surprising, and Krishna's answer is surprising. And Krishna, instead of saying, well, knowledge is what you've learned, Krishna begins to outline these qualities, incredible qualities: patience, non-violence, kindness to everyone. And Krishna says that is knowledge. Everything else is ajnana. Ajnana is like the lack of knowledge, or could say ignorance even. So this is part of, this is related to this yoga of gathering the wealth of the gods and goddesses, or gathering the divine wealth, Daivi Sampad. And part of that is appreciating the incredible qualities that other people have. So as part of this yoga practice, when you meet amazing people who, and you see these virtues, these incredible qualities that they live out in different ways, that becomes a source of inspiration in our life. And just by noticing that and by appreciating it, we build a bridge from their heart to our heart, in which those qualities cross and enter into us. And of course, the inverse is true as well. If we are looking at the faults and deficiencies, so-called deficiencies in others, and that becomes our focus, then they cross over. So this ability to differentiate between the qualities, the divine qualities, and what Krishna calls Asuri Sampad. There's no good translation of Asuri. Asuri is the opposite of gods and goddesses. You could say demons, perhaps. I've seen it translated in different ways. But maybe ungodly. Those qualities, those habits that don't help us, those habits that pull us down, that stop us from fulfilling or manifesting our full potential. The ability to differentiate between those two, and to nurture the qualities that help us. That's a system of yoga. Then there is a system of yoga that you'll come to, which is the yoga of the three qualities, the three gunas. So here we learn that the world, our field of perception, is made up of three different, you could say, forces or qualities. And some of you may have heard of these already. In Sanskrit, they are sattva, rajas, and tamas. So tamas is the quality of darkness. Tamas literally means darkness. It's that quality that we can experience in our life at various points that is destructive. It's either self-destructive or it's destructive towards others. So you see these in every aspect of life. So in our communication, when our communication is destructive, and it can be communication to others or to ourselves, known as self-talk. If we're putting someone down, if we are trying to injure them with our words, if we are criticizing them without being constructive, that's all that springs from that experiential quality of tamas. Then there's a different type of energy, and we can feel the difference in it. It's the energy of action, the energy of creation. So in communication, for example, this is when we have an agenda. So we're trying to impress someone with what we're saying. We're trying to convince them to do something. We're trying to establish that we're right. All of those are types of communication in rajas. And then there's a different quality, which is the which is known as sattva. Sattva literally means beingness. It's beingness. It's the Sanskrit equivalent, one of the Sanskrit equivalents of mindfulness, you could say, sattva. So that in communication, that is when we approach a conversation without any agenda. We're able to suspend our own needs in that moment, and we're fully present to the other person and what they're saying. Now, something quite magical, alchemical happens in that kind of conversation. And we experience it in two ways mostly. One is we feel very alive. We may even have not spoken about anything that has, incredible philosophical depth, or even a short, simple conversation with someone in sattva, we feel great vitality. And we feel a sense of intimacy with that other person. There's a connection of their heart and our heart. And that's because it is a conversation in the quality of sattva. So sattva it's a type, it's a mode of being that creates clarity. So you can compare it to different landscapes. So, okay, I when I was some years ago, long before the pandemic, I went to Paris, and I'd been to Paris a few times because for some years I grew up in France. And personally, I'm not so enamored by buildings. I tend I much prefer people. So buildings, when you actually see the building, for me, it always felt a little bit, you'll see images of the Eiffel Tower. And when you go there, it's like, oh, okay. That's how I felt for going to the Eiffel Tower many times. But there was one time where I went with a friend named Ariana, who was living in Paris. So she took me to the Eiffel Tower, but a different way than you normally go. So there's a way that you see the Eiffel Tower across the river. And there's steps leading down, and then there's a bridge across the river. It's a completely different view of the Eiffel Tower. And you're up onto something good because you see hardly any tourists, and it's local Parisians having their lunch on the riverbank. So it felt very much like I was in on a little secret, and I'd never seen the Eiffel Tower like that. It really looked stunning. So I thought to myself, well, this is really interesting. What has changed? I've not changed so much over those few months since I'd last been. The Eiffel Tower certainly hadn't changed. What had changed was my perspective. So what we see is not a function simply of what we're looking at, but where we're looking from. And that's the key teaching of this yoga system of the three gunas, the three qualities of perception, we can look at something from different perspectives. And sattva, rajas, and tamas are three different energetic or three different perceptual perspectives that we can look upon the field of perception. So if you compare it to a landscape, the marshes, the valleys and there are valleys and marshes and swamps that are like tamas. Someone in tamas, if we're in tamas, we can lose ourselves in tamas for many years. Many years can go by without even realizing that we're being weighed down or pulled down by something. One quality of tamas is that we become overcome by different addictions, whatever they are, that pull us down, that weigh us down. And when we are climbing up the mountain slope, that's like rajas. One aspect of rajas is that we're filled with countless longings. And another characteristic of rajas is that there's continuous activity. Those are two qualities of rajas. And then sattva is like the mountaintop. And we have a perspective from the mountaintop like no other. But it's hard to remain on the mountaintop always. And in fact, in what we do in everyday life, there needs to be some rajas also. So for example, if you're starting a business and you have partners who are very much in sattva, that's actually a problem. You never really get very much done. Because one aspect of sattva is you feel very self-satisfied. Self-satisfied meaning, what I mean by that in particular, or what Krishna means by that in particular, is you're satisfied in the self. You don't need anything in the world to find your worth. So someone in sattva doesn't feel the urge or need to do so much in the world. They're perfectly content. So for a business, for example, or any creative enterprise, there has to be some rajas. So the ability to work with these three qualities that are always mixing with each other, combining in different ways, that is a system of yoga known as the yoga of the three gunas. So there are 18 systems of yoga like that. And each one is really very powerful. And we're each drawn to a particular system of yoga, depending on our own personality, our nature. And so as you work your way through the teachings of the Gita, I found personally, it's helpful to look out for the system of yoga that really speaks to you and explore that in everyday life. Play with it and see how it works for you. So with your permission, I want to do a little exercise with you all for the section of the book that you are just about entering into, which is the section on discernment, which includes the three qualities of perception, the three gunas. It also includes the yoga system of the divine, the qualities, the wealth of the gods and goddesses. But before we do this little exercise, and you'll need a pen and paper for this. So if you don't happen to have a pen and paper, maybe if you could see if you could find one. It's also, of course, possible to do it on the computer, but it may be easier just to scribble some notes on a pad. So, but before that, I just want to give you an overview of what the Gita is intending to do. So one aspect of the teachings of India is that they're not designed to give us information. They're designed primarily to bring us transformation, to change the way that we see the world and ourselves and the way that we act on the field of perception. And there are some, for approaching any text, text from ancient India, there are a set of methods of interpretation, methods of reading a particular text. They're traditional methods that have been used for several thousand years, certainly hundreds of years. And one of them, the first one, is to compare the beginning and the end of a text. That's a very, if you are looking at the Yoga Sutras, if you're looking at the Bhagavad Gita or any text, to look at the beginning and the end of the text and to compare them. And the beginning and end will encapsulate the entire text. Not every text works in that way, but most of them do. So the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita is a very interesting verse spoken by a blind emperor. This emperor, he is the cause of the whole battle that's happening, the war at Kurukshetra. And in this first verse, he is expressing his own fears and attachments and ego. Dharma kshetre kurukshetre samaveta yuyutsavaha mamaka pandavaschaiva kim akurvata sanjaya. So Dhritarashtra, he's speaking to his minister and his charioteer, Sanjaya. And he's saying, my sons and the sons of Pandu, I know that they've gone to Kurukshetra to fight out this battle and to determine who is going to inherit the Kuru kingdom. I know this. And tell me, what happens? What happened on that field of Kurukshetra? So to appreciate this verse, it's important to know the narrative, the story of the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, and everything that's happened to this point. It's like an incredible adventure story. And in the Sanskrit, you can see the palpable fear that Dhritarashtra has, that his sons are going to be vanquished on that field of battle, and his sense of attachment and his ego. So both the Pandavas, who are on one side, so 5 brothers who are leading one army, and Arjuna is one of those 5, and the Kauravas, so the sons of Dhritarashtra himself, they're on opposite sides of the field of battle. But they actually all grew up under the care of that emperor. And the Pandavas, Arjuna's father, died when he was very young. And so he viewed, the 5 brothers viewed Dhritarashtra as their father and treated him with that respect and affection. So it's very surprising when Dhritarashtra is making that division, my sons and the sons of Pandu, and he's creating discord and division. So why does the Gita begin with in this way? Because Dhritarashtra's mindset is the most common way that we approach life. It's the most common way that we approach the field of action, the field of now, which is that we are lost or trapped in our own story. So we each are a storyteller. We each have a story. That story is the narrative of our life. And we carry that story with us wherever we go. We act from that story. Now, most of that story, we haven't created it ourselves, or a good part, we haven't created it ourselves. We've actually inherited it from our family, our parents, from from the advertising industry, from our friends, the ideas that we've inherited of what it means to be successful. Excuse me. So that story can be very onerous, very weighty, very burdensome. And we carry it with us wherever we go. And we believe it so wholeheartedly that we're prepared to fight for it. We're prepared to lose friends over it. Someone who supports our story, we think they're my friend. Someone who's a threat to it or who undermines it, we consider them our competition or our enemy. And so we begin to divide the world into three. Those who are our friends, those who are our opponents, and anyone in between is irrelevant to us. They're neither here nor there. And the lead character in our story, who we believe we are, is mostly a figment of the mind. And that lead character can take different roles. So that lead character can be a hero, heroine, can be a victim. We each create our own central character in our story. Our story can be the story of a victim. It can be the story of a long-suffering hero or heroine, and so many different permutations and ways in which we create the story of our life that we believe so much that we're prepared to lose everything for it. So that we have a story is not a problem. The problem comes in when we identify with it so strongly that we forget it's a story. And this is what happens with Dhritarashtra. He's overpowered by his own story. He can't see beyond it. And that inevitably leads to the conflict, division that we see in the narrative of the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita. So the Gita teaches us that there are basically two ways that we can approach life. Two different ways of approaching attitudes that we can bring to the field of perception, the field of action. And I'm going to try to illustrate that with a mudra. So some of you may know what mudras are. Mudras are gestures of the hands or the whole body that express a particular quality of consciousness. So you may know this mudra, which is known as the Anjali mudra. In India, the Anjali mudra has a few different meanings. One of them is my heart and your heart are one. So if we do this mudra, but we don't feel that my heart and your heart are one, then the mudra is incomplete. It's lacking in the most important dimension, which is the inner dimension. And it becomes simply a physical act, a physical expression. I won't even say an expression because it's not expressing anything. It just becomes the joining of two palms. But when it's accompanied by the heart of the mudra, then it becomes something very meaningful and very powerful, and it actually becomes a practice. So when yogis or yoginis or yoga practitioners, in the true sense, who are trying to practice more than simply kind of on a social level, they're trying to practice and enter deeply into the teachings. When they do the Anjali mudra, it's actually part of their practice because they are developing, they're becoming mindful, and they are creating, coming back to this yoga of the qualities of the gods and goddesses, they're bringing the quality of respect and love into their being by using the Anjali mudra, by practicing the Anjali mudra. So a mudra is a gesture of the hands or the body that expresses a quality of consciousness or an intent. So The one way to approach life is encapsulated by the first verse of the Gita, Bhagavad Gita. And if I were to express that in a mudra, it would be as follows. Now, you can't see this here, but I actually have a large pile of semi-precious gemstones on my desk. I have agates, amethysts. Somewhere in there, there's a ruby. They're of all different colors, and they're really very beautiful. Opals as well. So these stones, they represent the treasures or the gifts that the universe has given us. We each have so many different gifts that we've been given that sometimes we actually even forget or we take for granted. Gifts like intelligence, beauty, education, one important good health that we tend to take less for granted as the years go by is good health. The friendships that we have. Maybe the most important gift that we have is the unique personality or nature that we've been given, by which we express ourselves in a unique way in the world. So there are two ways we can approach life. One would be like this. Okay. So I've taken as many precious stones as I can in my hand, and I'm holding them very tightly. So this is the mudra that represents the words and the attitude of Dhritarashtra. If this mudra could speak, what would it say? It would say, I'm going to take as much as I can, and I'm going to hold on to it very tightly. Because if I open my fingers, what I'm holding on will slip from my hands, or someone will take it from me. So you can see it's a mudra of fear, it's a mudra of attachment, it's a mudra of ego. But there's another way that we can approach life, which is the exact inverse of this. So rather than holding our palm this way, we can turn it by 180 degrees. And rather than keeping our fingers closed, we can open them. Now, what's interesting about this mudra is that it's the mudra of giving, and it's also the mudra of receiving. With the closed fist mudra, there's a problem that we have. And that problem is that if the universe wants to give us more, we're not in a position to be able to receive it. Our hands are tightly and firmly, fingers are firmly closed. But with this mudra, which is the mudra of giving, our hands are open, our palms are open, and we're able to receive anything that the universe wishes to give us further. And I think that we've all, or most of us, will have had this experience in our life. Certainly, I've had this experience where I've taken a closed-fisted approach in what I'm doing in my life. It has always led to limitation and frustration, and it creates a contraction, like everything closes up. We become very eager to control situations or people. We're thinking very much in terms of what I'm going to receive, what I'm going to get out of this. But when we adopt this other approach to life, then the experience certainly I've had is the more we give, the more we receive. We may receive what we never even imagined we would receive. It's one of the laws of this universe, according to the ancient texts of India, that someone who makes giving a driver in their life, the universe will never allow that person's palms to remain empty. So that transformation, so in India, the palm represents the heart. So you'll see, for example, the various figures in India, like figures of great teachers, or devas and so on. They never have closed fists. It's always open palms. And this transition from a closed-fisted approach to life, so that means a closed-hearted approach to life, to an open-hearted approach to life, is the transition from the first verse of the Gita to the last verse of the Gita. The last verse of the Gita is all about the jewels that one receives by obtaining, by making that change in our life. So with pen and paper, let's do something interesting. Could you please write down a list of various acts of kindness that you could easily do in your life? So what I mean by that is very specific here. So, there may be a friend who's in difficulty, and there may be something, even encouraging words that you could give that person that would make a big difference in their life. There might be someone that you pass by every day when you go to the supermarket, and that person is a homeless person who sits outside the cash point, and you've passed by that person many times and felt a certain sadness to see their difficult situation. Maybe you could buy them a sandwich. Right now, we're simply exploring. You're not committing to doing anything, but make a list of, this is more like a brainstorming. Make a list of 10 things, 10 acts of kindness that you could do, you could imagine yourself doing over the course of the following month. And I'm going to ask you to please include the following 3 in your list. One of the acts of kindness should be towards yourself. Something you can do that is very kind for yourself. And another one to please include is an act of kindness to someone you don't know. And the third is an act of kindness to someone that you have a troubled relationship with. I don't know who that might be. It might be a family member. It might be a boss, someone that really it's been a challenge getting on with them. And in making that list, as you write down a particular act of kindness, if you could visualize yourself as you're writing it, rather than it being this exercise being like a chore where you're simply putting down things on paper, feel yourself in the situation, what it would be like doing that, so that it comes to life and you can get a sense, a feeling of being there in that moment and engaging in that particular act of kindness. If you're not able to reach 10, don't worry. Just as many as you can. But if you can do 10, that would be great. so I asked you if you could please also include an act of kindness for yourself. You can have more than one act of kindness for yourself. There can be a few for yourself as well, but at least one, if you can. Okay, now this next step of this particular exercise is not for all of you. So only continue only continue with this next step if you are willing to follow through without question. What I mean by that is it's actually for those of you who have studied the Dharma code, to make an intent and not follow through weakens us rather than strengthens us. So this next step, please don't feel any obligation or pressure to continue, and please only take this next step if you have the strong intent to continue with it and to actually follow it through with action. So over the coming week, and you can do this in two different ways if you want to take this next step. One way is to choose an act of kindness that you can do each day. So that for 1 week, so that would be 7. Or if you have put on your list acts of kindness that are not so easy perhaps, then maybe you might want to pick either 3 or just 1 to complete over the coming week. This will depend very much on what you've written, whether it's you might want to just focus on a single act of kindness over the coming week, or if you wish, 1 each day. And the idea here is that in the next session that you have, or in a session that you have with Ricken maybe 2 weeks from now, you'll be able to, when you reach this part of the teachings of yoga about the wealth, the treasure of the gods and goddesses, then you'll be able to discuss a little bit or do a follow-on based on your experience over the coming week. So at least maybe if you want to take this next step, maybe include also an act of kindness towards yourself. I think that's always very important. And this is a personal practice that I sometimes do myself, and I found that it's extremely helpful, mainly because we launch ourselves into our day and become overwhelmed by all of the various obligations that we have in life and the various things that we need to do relating to work and family and so on, which are important. But when we create a little bit of room in our life to develop or to find and retain the wealth of the gods and goddesses, it begins to have a very important impact in our life, that we begin to see flowing into all aspects of our life. It's like what you call a trim tab change. So when you have a very large tanker, there are these tankers that are so big that their height is like it's like a building with maybe 10 floors. They're that big. And they have these rudders that are enormous, also the size of a building. And these rudders, when these tankers change direction, it's very difficult for them. The arc, as they turn, is enormous. And no ship actually has hydraulics that are powerful enough to shift that rudder, because the rudder is so large. So what they have is a small rudder on the big rudder. It's called a trim tab. And that little rudder, hydraulics can move that. And when they shift that little rudder in one direction, the big rudder begins to move and the ship begins to make a huge turn. So it's said that by the time we reach, what is it, 45? I think it's 45, then 70 to 80% of what we do is habitual. We are really, in a way, the product of our own habits, which are difficult to change. And it's like a large tanker trying to take a different course or trying to adjust its course, let's put it that way. But there are small trim tab changes that can help us make change that really has a very powerful effect in our life. And developing the little things that help us develop the wealth of the gods and goddesses act like a trim tab change. We have run out of time. I wanted to do an exercise also about negative habits. Maybe we'll do this another time, let's see. But negative habits where this is a creative exercise that helps us identify them and see them for what they are and understand how they're affecting us and how to overcome them. But we have run out of time and I want to open it up to questions. I always really appreciate the opportunity for discussion and questions and objections and comments. If you have any, please let me know and maybe we can discuss any of those questions that you have in the course of reading Yoga and the Dark Night of the Soul. If you don't have any questions immediately, that's completely fine as well. Or if maybe some of your questions are a little bit personal, you don't want to ask in an open forum like that, especially I see the record buttons on. So that's fine as well. But I just want to open it up in case there's anyone who has a question.
I have a question, but I'll wait to see if there's anybody else that wants to go first.
Okay.
Okay, I'll just take that as an invitation to launch. Simon, one question that I had, and I wanted to ask this even last week when we're together, but I didn't have a chance to, is how do we approach a situation in life where maybe some people have, can relate to this, where we've been trying to make a change in a certain area, but we're having difficulty gaining traction. I know usually sometimes we're maybe trying to make too big of a change, probably at once. And it even sometimes becomes really difficult to make a small change, like that trim tab change you're talking about. It can even be difficult to do that. Do you have any thoughts or comments on this? Because, then it's exactly the feeling of feeling stuck. Right. And I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts to share on that.
It's a great question. Great question. One of the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita is, and this is a very important part of the system of yoga of the three gunas. It touches on that. We find it in other teachings as well, which is that it's very important when trying to make meaningful changes in our life to set up the structure or the external structure and environment to help us. So sometimes one might think that, okay, I'm going to make this change in my life and I'm going to do it myself. And I think that's a natural flow of a natural, I would say, response to a culture of individualism that we have in our society. And our ability to make change is very limited, especially over time, because the habits that we have formed are just weigh us down and govern the way that we think, the way that we speak, and the way that we live. So trim tab changes are very helpful, but also setting up the support structure, the support system for being able to make that change. So I found, for example, being accountable to someone, a close friend, and having that friend keep me accountable has been very helpful. Also, this very much depends on the kinds of, okay, let's look at it. Let's look at a practical example. Another aspect is who we tend to spend time with. That has a huge impact on the gunas, this combination of sattva, rajas, and tamas that influence our life. What we eat even is a combination of these qualities, and will affect the way that we feel and the way that we're able to do things. So what I'm trying to emphasize here, which I have found personally very helpful, is not simply try to do it on our own, but look for the right support structure and set up an environment that allows us to make the changes that we want to make. So a simple example of that, I was helping a friend who developed a very strong addiction to marijuana. And I'm aware, of course, that people use marijuana for different reasons. Sometimes it relieves pain, and sometimes it's just it helps diminish the pain, not just physical pain, but someone may be going through a very difficult situation, and it allows them to cope. But this was someone who, over the years, developed really an addiction to marijuana that was pulling him down and bringing in a lot of tamas, or the quality of lethargy, into his life. It was preventing him from doing the things that he also really wanted to do. There was a part of him that had that he's a very creative person, and he had many exceptional ideas of what he wanted to do to contribute, and various projects. So this was a change that he found very challenging. And a lot of it had to do with, of course, a lot of it had to do with the people he was spending a lot of time with. So he was spending a lot of time with people who had an addiction also. And anyone who has any experience with personal addictions will know that is the first thing you need to do. That you have to, if we have a particular addiction, spending a lot of time with others who have that addiction is not going to help us. There have to be some changes in our external life that need to happen in order to give us, even if it's for some time, that gives us the support system and the environment by which we can make the changes we need to make. So I would say that one very helpful, important, or I'd say even more than important, necessary aspect of making change in our life is not trying to do it alone. It depends really on the change, but there will be certain changes that very, very difficult to do on our own, or to do without setting up a support structure. Say, for example, I make a decision, I'm going to become vegan. Right? If I make that decision, I cannot have milk products in my fridge. if I'm quitting smoking, if I'm making various other changes, there will be structural changes that I need to first make. And even that may not ensure success, but it's very, very helpful. The combination of trim tab changes and not trying to do this on our own, and also setting up a support system of some kind to help us through that is really very helpful. In some of the groups that we've done that I've worked with over the years in different locations, and this is much easier to do when we spend a lot of time together. So when you have a retreat over a period of 1 week and you develop friendships and trust between members of a group, then it becomes possible to have what I sometimes call Dharma buddies, or someone who's interested in making the same change or a similar change, and to work like that with someone else is incredibly helpful. And you made the very important point, Rikin, that sometimes we try to do much more than we're able to do, and it's little gradual steps that can make a big difference. I won't say it's easy. I don't want to pretend that it's easy. Sometimes we come across, we read about these teachings in the Bhagavad Gita and other yoga texts, and there can be a gap between the teaching and its application. And that's the real important bit. Finding ways to really live embody those teachings in the way that we live. And we will have successes and we will have failures in doing that. And one other aspect I found that is very important is kindness and compassion to ourselves. We're not perfect individuals, and the yoga teachings don't try to teach us to become some models of perfection. We live in a world where there are very strong influences upon us, and it's admittedly very difficult to make change, and at the same time very important. And the changes that we do make can have such a huge impact on our life and the lives of those around us, family members and friends and so on. So when we are able to make meaningful change like that and to see the impact of that, it's incredible, without a doubt. And at the same time, to hold some compassion and kindness and understanding in our own heart for ourselves is important as well.
Thank you. Just a kind of a quick follow-up to that. And this is obviously sharing my experience to many of the things that you've suggested. But I find also when we work on our environment, and maybe someone else can connect with this, or even you, Simon, is that we become desensitized to even the things we create. So for example, visually we need a reminder. So we put something in to remind us,
Right.
We set that alarm clock that we just ignore, or we even have that accountability person and they check in with us and we're like, I'm done with it, or whatever, we don't take it as serious, we don't take it seriously. We become desensitized to even the environment we're trying to create. And I'm definitely speaking for myself here, but I just wanted to get your reflections on this desensitization.
Yes, it's a very interesting what you brought up. It's when the things that we do become routinized.
Yeah.
And in this little exercise that we did, one or two things that I said were designed or were intended to touch upon that. So usually that happens when we become disconnected, disconnected with what we're doing, but even disconnected with the body that we inhabit. The physical aspect of yoga is very powerful, and it has it's become very popular in the West, in particular. But that's for good reason. It is very helpful, because it removes that sense of disconnect, where we're no longer in the excitement and the spontaneity of the moment, but everything becomes like a routine, and we feel a sense of alienation and disconnection from what we're doing, and also from our own lives and from the very physical body that we're inhabiting. There are, if any of you practice meditation, then that actually helps that. It helps that, where when meditation is done in a way that is successful, and it's stepping beyond the routine of it, and then there's a sense of strong vitality and aliveness that you then take into the day, and it runs against, or it makes it, it removes that sense of doing things as a matter of routine without our heart being present in it. So there are ways, but I like very much what you said, Rick, and you're the first person actually who's articulated that really clearly. That is definitely a challenge. Well, the first person in various sessions that I've done on yoga and the dark night of the soul that has addressed that in such a clear way. Thank you.
It's just my, I guess it's where I'm at, and just what I'm also trying to navigate, because we speak about these these principles, and obviously we've been going through Book of Dharma in this book, and really one of the privileges that I have of trying to facilitate the session is also trying to take on the information myself and trying to apply it, and these are just some of the things that I'm coming across.
One thing that I have found, and that I personally believe to be the case, is that it is not helpful to, it's not, okay, maybe I should nuance this a little bit. We're all a little bit different, and so perhaps for some people it can be helpful, or for a time it can be helpful, but sometimes we might be tempted to enter into the field of like self-development by doing many different things, many different systems. We're exploring this, we're exploring that, we give up on that, we go to the next thing, and that we'll try for a week, or we'll think about, but no meaningful change in our life. Then we'll go back to this event. That in the end can be quite damaging. It's far better to look around, sure, and then try a particular system and go deeply into that, rather than dig shallow holes instead of a deep well. A deep well will help us reach water, but the shallow digging that we can easily do, where it can become like it can even become quite addictive, where we're moving from one thing to another in the hope that the next system that we come across, which might be an ancient system, or it might be like a new system, that will be the end of our problems. And it can act as a screen that helps us from doing the real work. The real work, these various systems are just tools. But the real work is what we're talking about here, where we're actually making, we're developing the courage to look at ourselves and to look at our lives without false perceptions, as it is, and we're doing the difficult work that allows us to make changes, meaningful changes in our life. And sometimes the exploration of different systems can obscure that, and it acts like as a screen that allows us to avoid, it can be a form of avoidance.
Thank you for that. I found, in just this process of, one of the hardest things that, we find in making any change is the consistency of trying to get back on the horse when we've fallen off.
Right.
And to me, like, this group really represents of the, just showing up every week for me is really the work, right? It's just showing up. Like, we don't know if we're gonna like make, if anything's gonna change, but the fact that we've shown up, to me, is really like, that's, my victory every week.
I think it's incredible what you, this group and what you've been doing. Spending also, for many of you, it's very early, or the timing is like a little bit tricky, and to show up nonetheless that's exceptional.
Agreed. Does anyone else have any comments they wanted to share, questions? Again, we have this good fortune of having Simon with us, and I'm sure there's maybe been a question or a thought that's come across. Please feel free to share and be as open and as candid as you want to be.
Well, Ricken is very kind, and he says very kind things, but really it's my good fortune to be able to spend time with you.
I sort of have a question, seeing as Simon's here, read a few of your books, but I'm new to this group. I haven't spent the time with you guys, and one of the goals, I know Tiffany very well, but one of my goals, she's been encouraging me, because I read a lot and I've been studying a lot, to get around people who are trying to improve their lives and through knowledge, and share it, and the back and forth to understand what it is you're learning sometimes. Because for me, from the Bhagavad Gita to the Tao Te Ching to the Matthew principles, studying across, I've been looking for a way to communicate across religions and languages, so that when you come across people, because I do this a lot in my work, that I can understand and respect where they're coming from, and have a good dialogue. So I'm always working on that kind of thing. And so when it comes to the Bhagavad Gita, this question is about, so it took me a long time to understand. I don't know if you know the poem Ithaca by C.F. Cathy, but he talks about the journey. And then when you get to Ithaca, it doesn't matter what it is at Ithaca anyway. And that sort of sums up the Bhagavad Gita to me. That's really what I get out of that whole study. And but in that journey and the nudging, when you were talking about the rudder earlier,
right?
So an example of how I help, we have these centers where there are people going through drug addiction and stuff. And I was trying to figure out, and they're trying to recover through their lives. How can you help? And going through some of that stuff in my earlier life, I wondered, what would have helped me? And it was the purpose that you felt like you don't belong, or you're not good enough. Like, your life is like, doesn't matter now. I've cleaned up. I've done so much wrong so what I wanted them to understand was that their testimony and their journey, and I bring it onto my radio station, and it can change the lives of the people that are going through this. So now all of a sudden, you're not the victim. You have this power to change the world.
Right. So
that I felt that was a nudging way. But as I go through these journeys and talk to these people, the Bhagavad Gita tells you, forget it. Don't worry about the outcomes, and it's the journey of doing this stuff. But how do you measure your own outcomes to decide, am I doing the right journey? How do you measure yourself? What do you do in that sense for you to think, okay, this journey I'm on is a pretty good one. Doesn't matter the outcome, but I'm on the right journey this time around.
Mm-hmm. Rob, I love the work that you're doing, and if can you tell me which radio station this is, or where I'm
Life Radio. It's actually a Christian radio station that I don't go to church, but I ended up being the DJ and guy who runs this Christian radio station. It's amazing. It's the oddest thing, but
amazing. The issue you've raised is one that's considered quite important in the various traditions of India, and it relates closely to the understanding of the teacher in those traditions. So according to the Bhakti tradition, for example, the universal teacher, there's the universal teacher who is present in the heart of each of us. And it's this ability to recognize truth. So the universal teacher comes to us in various ways in our life, and three in particular. One is as the inner guide. So there's one beautiful Sanskrit verse that explains that when the inner guide speaks to us, we're able to hear that voice. We're able to recognize it, and it's very similar to knowing that we're awake. So right now, someone may ask, may question, are you awake or are you asleep? We know intuitively when we're awake. And in the same way, we're able to recognize truth. And the universal teacher comes to us as the inner guide, comes to us also as the various mentors in our life. So according to the teachings of India, all the various teachers who've helped us in our life at various times, may include our parents, may include close friends, may include people who have said some kind and truthful words to us that have set us in a particular direction. And then the third way that the universal teacher reaches us is through the environment. Every aspect of the environment has something to teach us. Suffering can be a great teacher. Suffering, in my own life, suffering has been one of my greatest teachers. So I bow down to the suffering in my life because it has brought me to where I am now. In the traditions of India, there's an implicit trust in the universal teacher, that in the various ways that that teacher will come into our life and guide us in the way that's best for us at the particular time, the particular juncture we are in our life. And that is usually affirmed by the inner guide also, who is also the universal teacher. We should feel the effects in our life. Vitality, dynamic change. Speaking from my own personal experience, there have been periods in my life where I've been through a dark night of the soul, and I wasn't quite sure for some years even where I was going. But there've also been periods in my life where you really see remarkable change. And I have felt very confident that in my case, the path of bhakti, the path of bhakti yoga is the path that's for me. I would say, someone asked me this question in Lithuania, similar in a way to what you asked, but they asked it to me on a personal level. How did you choose the particular yoga tradition that you're following? And I could only say I didn't choose it, it chose me.
That's great. Thank you.
Well, on that note, I think if anyone has any final comments, we will wrap things, because I know obviously everyone probably needs to get on with the rest of the day, and we just want to be respectful of Simon's time as well.
Great deal of appreciation to Simon and Rick, and this has been fantastic. It truly enlightens my soul to have been part of this conversation in this series of conversations, Rick, and that you have every week. It's honestly life-changing and very, very much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you, Paul,
Thank you,
for
Paul.
joining every week, and yeah, no, thanks to everyone for joining today. Simon, just with the genuine Anjali Mudra, that you spoke of, thank you so much for joining us, and my our heartfelt thanks for making the time, despite how many things that you have going on. Just really appreciate it. And again, like I said, thank you for the time that we had together last week, and for just guiding so many of us through your book. We just are, everyone's eyes are just like open, like bright-eyed every week when we come together to discuss the book. And so just wanted to thank you again, and we really appreciate everything.
Thank you, Ricken, for the kind invitation and for your friendship. And it was wonderful to have you here in Costa Rica.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Can I say something?
Please, Hiba.
Yeah, Simon, just I want to say really thank you. In addition that you have been guiding us, that we have like weekly communication with you. Without, I don't know if you feel it, with this group, with the Ricken, with everything. So we feel like, now you're speaking, I was waiting for each word you were saying, because really you have been with us for a very long time. In our daily life, sometimes things happen to us in daily, and I remember one of the sentence or one of the teaching you were saying. So really, thank you. Thank you for making this change in our life and for everybody else.
Thank you so much, Hiba.
Yeah, thank
You're
you.
very kind.
Christina?
Yeah, maybe also shortly adding to that, it's just amazing how universe is reconnected. I mean, Ricken, you make a change. Just maybe not there where you were expecting that, but this group is just an example of it. And it's just amazing with what gratitude it is, and where the things we do suddenly speak because it touched somebody, some stranger. So thank you. Happy, grateful, and looking forward to continue.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you so much. All right, we'll just get a quick, thanks to Simon again for joining us. I mean, a round of applause really doesn't, do what we feel justice, but again, with deep gratitude, we really thank you for your time, and look forward to hopefully having you again sometime in the future when it allows.
Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Nice to see you.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you, Simon.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Simon.